April 30th of 2000, a little 4-year-old boy would be thrust into one of the most traumatic experiences a young child could have. His mom, only 25 at the time, Holly, would be abducted from her home in Clearville, Pennsylvania, and he would witness the whole thing. Hello and welcome to Close Range Crime. My name is Ray, and today we are going to do something a little different than what we normally do on this channel. My content is heavily based on unsolved crimes. You guys know, if you've seen my videos before, I actually go out and interview people, I research, I fact check on my own, and I've recently added a researcher to help me with some other cases so that I'll be able to bring you more content more regularly. The unsolved videos, because they are set up in a documentary form, they do take a lot of time. So I want to work on some things in between so that I can give you some more videos. Solved cases are just as important to talk about, not only because we should highlight the victim and their life, but also because we can learn from these cases. We can learn about detective techniques, we can learn about forensics and things like that. So it is important to evaluate and learn from these cases, as well as talk about who the victim was, who they were as a person, and their impact that they made. I want to give a huge thank you to researcher Jolie T for her help on this case. She did an amazing amount of work in order to get me going to tell this story. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it. This is Holly Notestine's story. Holly Christine Notestine was a beautiful woman. She had 2 children, a 6-year-old girl named Chastity and a 4-year-old boy named Logan at the time that this happened. She also had a fiancé, Ronnie Grubb, and they all lived in this quiet rural area in Clearville, Pennsylvania, Bedford County. Holly was known for absolutely adoring animals. She loved to take care of animals, which was good because she was on a farm. She was a bit of a tomboy. She liked to fish and participate in dirt track races. Basically, she was just a local country girl keeping to herself and tending to her farm, caring for her family. From all accounts, she was a wonderful mother, and on the surface, it looked like they all had a very peaceful home. It looked like there were no major issues within their household. So on April 30th, around 9 p.m., it was actually Ronnie's mother who ended up calling the police after Ronnie had called her. He was in a total panic. He could not find Holly, and he talked to his son Logan. That gave him disturbing information, and Ronnie is convinced that Holly has been abducted. Basically, when Ronnie got home from working on the farm, little Logan, again 4 years old, ran up to him and said, "Mommy is gone and she's never coming back." So Ronnie is home with his kids. He has all this anxiety. He's shaking. He's panicking, just trying to process the situation. It ends up being Detective Feathers who races to the Notestine home. Feathers talks to Logan and learns that Logan saw a light-colored vehicle outside. The car had backed up to their door. Logan becomes a key witness at the age of 4 because not only did he see the vehicle, but he sees the man who shoves Holly in his car. Logan is looking out from the kitchen window, and he sees a man that he reports, quote, looks like Tiny. Tiny is a family friend, a close family friend actually, named Joe Clark. The detective goes in to clarify, was it Tiny or did it look like Tiny? And Logan said it looked like Tiny, that this was a tall, fat man with a beard. He was fighting with Holly and then made Holly get into the vehicle. The detective starts to search their property and sees immediately that there are tire tracks on the ground right where Logan said this incident happened. Not that he doubted Logan, but Logan is 4. However, there are very detailed studies And 4-year-olds do hold the capacity to have that long-term memory that is needed. So even though Logan is young, what he is saying is so far proving to be true. Now, in addition to the tire tracks, when Detective Feathers is inspecting the property, he finds blood, and it's enough blood to definitely be concerned. This definitely escalates the situation. The Bedford area, it's very rural, it's very safe, and this news rocks this town, of course. Corporal Roger Smith from the Pennsylvania State Police Office actually joins the investigation at this time. Now they begin to look into Joe Clark's past. Now, despite people in the town knowing Joe Clark to be very friendly, very helpful, really not someone who is of any concern or any danger to the area, the police find some very disturbing information in his background check. This so-called gentle giant is holding a lot of secrets. He actually has been charged and convicted of sexual battery, SA. There is a series of previous convictions for violence on women, and he was placed on probation in 1983 for exposing himself to a woman. From 1987 to 1990 in Georgia, he served 3 years in prison for aggravated assault on a woman. He served another year in Fairfax County, Virginia in 1994 for sexual battery. Clark has some very dark secrets, and he is very manipulative. So let's go back to the day that Holly was abducted. 6 hours after she's abducted, the police get a phone call that there is a car on fire at Joe's house. When they get there, he is actually trying to put the fire out with a water hose, and he claims that the car just randomly bursts into fire. He also starts explaining an alibi without the police really even asking him any questions, so this is kind of suspicious. He starts to explain that he was in Maryland that evening, and throughout his trip to Maryland, his car actually overheated several times. Now the fire department comes to put out the fire, and they're having trouble with Joe Clark because he keeps trying to get back into the vehicle. At this point, an arson investigator is brought to the scene. This would be investigator Craig Grassmeyer. He and the other 2 detectives are noticing right away that Joe's behavior is very suspicious at the time. So why is Joe Clark continuously trying to get back into his car? Well, the investigators end up finding a buck knife in his car. Now, it is not unusual for people, especially in that area, to carry a buck knife on them in their vehicle, to have one around. But it is very suspicious that Joe seems to want to grab something from the vehicle. Now, there is no blood on this knife, and they basically bag it as evidence. Grassmeyer is able to determine that the fire actually started on the passenger seat of Joe's car. So they then bring him into the police station for questioning. He states again that he was in Maryland until about 9 or 10 p.m. that evening, that he had nothing to do with Holly's abduction. Listen to this unbelievable story, literally unbelievable story that he tells. Clark admits to setting the vehicle on fire. Now, why did he do so? He claims that he thought that he would get in trouble because he bought beer in Maryland and brought it to Pennsylvania. So that prompted him to literally set his car ablaze. If you look at this car, it is just incinerated. There's nothing left. Guys, make it make sense. You hear some pretty incredible stories, but I have to say that's a doozy. The police do not have enough to charge him with Holly's abduction, and they also do not charge him with arson because he set the fire on his own property. So they let him go. They do tell him not to leave town, so they are applying pressure. Meanwhile, everyone in the family is just not convinced that Joe Clark had anything to do with this. They think that it's very possible Logan is mistaken, or that someone that looked like Joe Clark was responsible for the abduction, but they just cannot see their friend being the person who abducted Holly. They cannot see any red flags that he's shown in the past that would lead them to believe that he was a dangerous person. So investigators keep Clark on the radar for sure, but they also have to investigate other angles. They learn that Holly confided in a friend that she was not as happy as others may have thought that she was. She said that the family was having some pretty intense financial problems and that this was a cause for she and her fiance, Ronnie Grubb, to argue on a regular basis. Now, being that Ronnie is Holly's fiance, he is going to be looked at regardless. But this does add the idea that there may be some motive here for Ronnie to harm Holly. So investigators are going to start looking into bank accounts, into property values, into any type of life insurance that might have been put out on Holly. So the two have a farm, and the investigators learn that the heavy farm equipment is actually in Holly's name. So should something happen to Holly, they could never come after anyone else for that property. It can't be repossessed. To add to this, they are told by another close friend of Holly's that Holly was actually unhappy on the farm, that she didn't like the farm lifestyle. So they bring Ronnie into the police station, of course, and they question him. Ronnie says he was with another farmhand working on the farm, and the investigators are easily able to confirm this. Ronnie said he and Holly's relationship was fine. They had the normal type of arguments, but there was nothing that was actually jeopardizing the relationship. And Ronnie actually offers to the police to do a polygraph, which he passes. They really cannot find any proof that Ronnie had harmed Holly in any way. They don't believe that she was unhappy with him and vice versa. They don't completely rule him out, of course, but they basically stop looking into him and start looking into other angles. And at this point in time, the police put together a search party and search the surrounding areas of Holly's home. And they also search the family farm. Unfortunately, they find no clues. And as the weeks go on, police are getting tips that Holly has been seen throughout the area. They follow up on these tips, but nothing can be confirmed. They do get a tip that concerns them. A man named Alex was seen around the Grubb family farm in a car that matched the description of the car Logan gave. They learn that this Alex lives in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is about 2 hours away. So they travel to Harrisburg to interview. Alex says he was in town. He was visiting family and that he was actually hunting around the area of the Grubb farm with a friend at the time. They're completely barking up the wrong tree. He has nothing to do with this at all. He doesn't even know Holly. Alex doesn't have any type of criminal history, and the detectives really find no reason to believe that Alex was involved. This was not going to be the tip that solved the case. And after this, the case basically goes cold. The family has to wait 4 years with no real progress in the case, and then a body is found. On March 27th, 2004, Holly's body is found only a few miles away from her home. Through dental records, they are officially able to say that this is Holly. She was found in deep woods by a local logger. They do find her clothing amongst the scattered remains, and they find the engagement ring that Ronnie had given Holly. So there's actually this series called Nightmare Next Door by Sirens Productions, and they went to Bedford and interviewed several people, Holly's family, the investigators, to report on this case. And there's a part of this specific interview that kind of hits me hard. When talking about the engagement ring, Corporal Smith actually gets choked up in saying that he made sure to get that ring back to Ronnie because of the value that he knew that had. I think when you talk about detectives, to know the type of things that they've seen, the type of things that they've witnessed and been a part to, the type of trauma that they've been exposed to, and then to see one of these detectives actually get emotional about something, you know that that case, you know that Holly meant something, you know that the family is on their minds and they want to get justice. It just really puts it into perspective, the emotions that Holly and her family have been throughout this ordeal. Now that Holly's body has been found, the case is basically reignited. They do an autopsy. There is evidence of multiple stab wounds, 17 in total. Holly has several broken ribs, and the cause of her death is blunt force trauma to her head. The first thing investigators do after learning about the autopsy is they take that knife that they found in Clark's car to re-examine it. They find that that knife is very much consistent with the type of knife that was used on Holly, but unfortunately they can't find any of Holly's DNA on that knife. The fire destroyed all evidence of that. No blood was found on the knife. No blood was found in Clark's car or on Clark's person, and we were not going to get a confession from him. Now, I really have to give it to investigators here, because even though all of these things are not found, that you don't have this forensic evidence, the investigators arrest Joe Clark anyway. This happens 5 days after Holly's body is found. So as they continue to work the case, they re-examine the tire tracks that were found right outside of Holly's door. They have some luck, because the type of tires to leave these tracks were very, very unique. The investigators actually had to travel about 2 hours away to obtain the type of tires that Joe Clark had on his car. So they get these tires, they look at the tracks that were left outside of Holly's door, they compare it to the tracks that were on the tires of Joe's 1985 Oldsmobile, and they find that the tracks match. It actually took 8 years for this case to go to trial, 4 years after the discovery of Holly's body. Months before the June trial that convicted him, there was actually a mistrial after the jury, quote, couldn't reach a verdict after 6 days of deliberation. The judge and the defense attorney both agreed that they did not feel they could get a fair trial there locally in Bedford County, so they actually selected jury members from the neighboring county, Dauphin County. Now, unbeknownst to them, the team would actually get a huge obstacle thrown at them in the middle of jury selection. Tony Hayter. Clark's defense attorney says that Tony Hayter, a prisoner serving 30 years for armed robbery, actually admitted to killing Holly while he's in prison. The investigators look into it and they find that he actually does have a connection to Bedford County. So off they go to prison to interview him. As they interrogate him, Tony stumbles, stammers, he gets all the facts incorrect. So the investigators aren't convinced. They go to actually interview an ex-girlfriend of Tony's and find that at the time of Holly's abduction and murder, Tony didn't have access to a car and no means to get to Bedford County at the time. She says that he was not anywhere near Holly's home. So the investigators basically conclude that Tony Hayter is full of shit, and they mark him off the list and continue with the trial. So here we are at the second trial, and Joe Tiny Clark is being charged with first-degree premeditated murder, in addition to kidnapping and arson. The prosecutor's argument is that 300-pound Joe Tiny Clark had this infatuation with 95-pound Holly Notestine, and that night he had made a pass at her. They say Holly firmly denies him, and Joe loses his shit. This guy has a temper, he has a history of violence, and a history of sexual assault on women, so it's not a far stretch. He easily overpowers her. He grabs his knife from the vehicle, and he stabs her right there. That's where the blood on the ground came from. He then drags her into the vehicle, forces her to stay in the vehicle, and drives off, leaving those tire prints behind. Little innocent 4-year-old Logan watches helplessly from the kitchen window as he sees his mom being beat by a man that is 3 times his mom's size. Cannot imagine the trauma. So the prosecutors say that Joe drives off with Holly. He beats her relentlessly, stabs her relentlessly. She gets those broken ribs, the blunt force trauma to her head, and then she dies. He throws her in an area that is remote enough for her not to be found for 4 years. And the jury agrees. Despite the defense trying to place blame on another person, on Clark's poor mental health, stating that he had some type of generalized mental dysfunction, whatever that means. To my knowledge, that is not any type of scientific psychological terminology, but that basically was his defense. In addition, Clark was abused as a child, so that is why he has all these issues. The jury doesn't care. The jury hears it and believes that Clark is guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. Now, throughout every single thing I've read and seen, there was absolutely no indication that Holly was SA'd. So let's hope that she really was spared of that in the last minutes of her life. Her death was brutal enough without that happening. I think one of the main things that also really hit it home for the jury is when Clark took the stand in his defense. The jury saw him as aggressive, as sarcastic, and just a very unlikable, manipulative person. Joseph Clark's testimony would last 7 hours, and it was said that at first he was very calm, but by the time it was over, he was very combative. Now, something that I really enjoyed is the fact that he put his foot in his mouth, because the judge actually determined that Joe Clark's history of abuse on women would not be discussed in the case. It would not be brought up. But Joe actually brought up that he was a very good man, a Christian man, and apparently this opened the floodgates in order for the prosecution to actually talk about Joe's past with the essay on women, which just drove it into the ground that he's not so good and he's not so Christian according to his past. They sentenced him to life without parole. The death penalty was actually pursued in this case, but not all jury members agreed to that, so that's why he got life in prison. Thankfully, this manipulative loser, this narcissistic asshole, will never be free in public again. Life sentence very much deserved. Bill Higgins was the district attorney at the time, and he was quoted saying, "We are certainly pleased to be able to give the Notestine and Grubb families another step towards closure in this tragedy brought upon them by Joseph Clark." 9 years and 1 month later, the family would finally have a funeral for Holly to lay her to rest. Logan was 15 at the time, and Chastity was 14 at the time, and they both helped plan her funeral. By all accounts, Holly was very much loved in her family and by her friends. Her son and her daughter are such strong people, and you can see a little bit of Holly in each of them. Her absence impacted everyone. She was only 25 and she had so much more life to live. She had so many more things to experience with her fiance and with her children. I love that the detectives stayed on top of this case to see it through and bring justice for her family. It's been 20 years, but Ronnie still speaks so highly of Holly. He talks about her absence as if the incident happened yesterday. This family went through hell, but it's wonderful to see Holly's son and daughter and to see Ronnie. And you can just tell that they've been working together to heal as a family. Thank you so much for listening to Holly's story. Again, I want to thank researcher Jolie T for her extensive help in this case. And I want to thank you all for supporting this channel. Anyone who has information on this case, knew Holly, has accounts of Holly, or has corrections to this video, please feel free to reach out and email me. I always put any type of correction, comment, or thing like that that's pertinent to the case below in the description, so you can check that out if you want to. Also, if you have any case suggestions, solved or unsolved, please email me at this email, CloseRangeCrime@yahoo.com. If you wouldn't mind, help me out to support this channel by subscribing and liking this video. YouTube is going to give you another case that I have worked on that you may be interested in. It's going to come up here on the screen. Again, thank you all, and I wish nothing but the best for the Notestine family. As always, guys, don't be afraid to go out there and raise some hell. I'll see you later.